weather is pretty grim. Maude's new paint hasn't fallen off yet. Still can't get over how good these two cars now look together. It was actually bent this way. The water was coming off of this part of the heater box. It was gushing out. Aaaaand I. Bonnet. Disaster. Dad's Mark III. Well, that's not a good sign. Hello and welcome to this video. I'm Marcus Hayes, and today you join me from the cockpit of Maude, my Mk2 Escort. I'm heading over to my other garage now to mess about with the cars, but we have had loads of rain over the last few days and we're forecast for a bit more today, so the weather might dictate exactly how much we get done today. During the week I had a little bit of time to look at a couple of things, and as soon as I get to the garage I'll bring you all up to speed and then we'll crack on with today's activities. Alright, so I've made it to the garage, which took way longer than usual. Loads of cars on the road today, but it is what it is. The weather is looking pretty grim. It keeps trying to rain, but we'll just have to see if it's going to clear up a bit. Maude's new paint hasn't fallen off yet, which is good. And I haven't had time to paint the bumpers yet. But one thing I did do during the week is line the inside of the doors with this sticky back plastic stuff. Then I started sort of cutting it around here and trying to get it to stick to that actual inner lip bit. And then I realised that actually the way this is designed is that the plastic goes on it flat, and then any water that does get in between the inside of the door and the plastic, it runs down these channels and eventually gets to these holes here at the bottom of the door and then goes back inside the door. And then of course you've got holes underneath the door like these where the water can then run out, and it runs out here rather than going into the car. So yeah, I'm going to redo this one. On the others I've left it, you know, as it should be, flat. So yeah, I will be redoing this one. I actually ran out of sticky back plastic, but since then Kat picked me up another roll. I would like to today at least make a start on painting the bonnet. Before I crack on with anything today though, I want to give you a little update on Esther, my ST170 powered Mk1 Escort. Still can't get over how good these two cars now look together. Anyway, in the last video I mentioned that Esther had a little bit of an issue with her idle. Sometimes, you know, the idle would be too high, and I thought it was either an air leak or something to do with the throttle cable linkage. Well, the other day when I had a look at the linkage, I noticed that this bit here, where it attaches to that rod down there, was actually bent this way. I actually made a little clip on my phone that day, which I'll put up now. Now this is a genuine Gen V throttle cable linkage, and basically it's in two parts. You've got this lower part here that bolts to the throttle bodies, and then this upper part that bolts to it. And the way it was before is that this upper part was on this side of the bottom part. So what I did was I basically unbolted it and I've mounted it now to that side of the bottom part, which means that this part isn't under tension, you know, this way. It's directly above where it needs to be, and that should stop this piece getting bent. I obviously straightened this piece before I put it back together, and yeah, it seems like it works okay now. But I haven't test drove the car since I did that job, so yeah, fingers crossed when I do, it'll be fine. One thing I mentioned when I was filming the last video, but I did cut it out because the video was getting too long, is that I've now had to re-bypass my heater. Those of you who've been watching my videos will remember that a while ago I had an issue where there was coolant leaking onto the front floor pans. And the last time that I bypassed the heater, I noticed that the fitting on the water rail here wasn't actually biting on the water rail properly, and I decided to re-plumb the heater back in to find out if it was that fitting that was at fault or the actual heater matrix itself. It's strange because I managed to go to the meet at Herbie's in Cambridge and I didn't seem to have a leak then, unless it was really minimal and it was getting soaked up by the floor mats. But yeah, the other day it was gushing out. Basically the water was coming off of this part of the heater box, and when I put my finger here the drip stopped, but when I put my finger here they didn't, which leads me to think that it's actually coming from the heater box itself rather than the pipes up there. Obviously, it could have been running down from those pipes, you know, down here and then running down here, but I couldn't see any moisture up there at the time. So yeah, I'm thinking it's the heating matrix itself. I could fit like an aftermarket electric heater instead, which I might end up doing, and just doing away with the standard heater box. I'm not sure yet. For now, I'm just going to run the car with the heater bypassed, and yeah, no more worries about getting wet feet. Another thing I've done since the last video is fit these sort of rubber bump stops to the front of the bonnet. I've only bought the rubbers because they're a lot cheaper than buying the rubbers with the original style bolts. And yeah, I'm just going to Aaaaand I these to those Allen key bolts. Now what this means, if I just shut the bonnet, is that I'm not solely relying on the error catches themselves to hold the bonnet down and set the height of the bonnet. I've been able to loosen the pins off for the error catches, and yeah, the pressure is now sort of leaning against those rubber bump stops. So yeah, you know, the bonnet doesn't move, and that may prevent some of the vibration that this bonnet has when you're at high speed. The bonnet doesn't vibrate as much as it looks like on the footage, but yeah, hopefully now it will vibrate even less. Sky's looking slightly less grey than it was, so hopefully it's going to stay dry for a little while. I'm going to wait for my neighbours to get out of the way and then take Esther for a quick rip to see if I've solved her idle issue. But before I do, because I've been messing around with a throttle cable linkage, I need to reset the throttle position sensor. Alright, so I've got the ME221 ECU from Motorsport Electronics hooked up to my very cheap laptop. Just turn the key on and it should connect automatically, I think. It's the ECU tab, and then throttle calibration. Take your foot off the accelerator and then press next down here. Open the throttle fully, so you just put your foot fully on the accelerator and then click next again. Click finish, and that is the throttle position sensor calibrated.
This car feels so quick after being in Maude. So far, no signs of the idle issue.
Well, that was loads of fun. Right now, I'm going to turn my attention back to Maude. I'm going to have a go at primering this bonnet. I think while it's still attached to the car, I'm going to try and key up as much as I can without, you know, risking hitting the blue paint or the black paint on the scuttle grille. And yeah, I need to sand off some of these lumps of paint where I was using the bonnet as a table. Definitely going to be leaving these bits of rust here and these bits here because they tell part of the story of Maude's history when the alternator fan came off and damaged the bonnet. But yeah, everything else is going to get prepped, and then I'll hit all the other rust areas with a wire brush and a drill, and hopefully be able to at least get it primered today. Alright, now I'm going to give the whole bonnet a going over with the 80 grit, just in case. Right, so after a degrease, you can definitely see what's what a bit better. Quite a few spots where I've broken through bare metal, but I can just dust some etch primer on there before I actually primer it. Got a bit of rust around here. I think I might have put some fiberglass in here before. Yeah, I can see the remnants there. So I might put a little skim in there. I'm not going to dig it all out, that's for sure. And then there was a bit around here. And that's pretty much it. Not going to fuss too much. So yeah, let's get the wire brush and the drill out. Maybe a flat wheel will work better. Well, unfortunately, I don't have any cure rust left, so I'm going to skip straight to the fiberglassing. As I mentioned, I'm going to stick a little bit in there, and I also found a couple of holes around here, so I'm going to throw a bit of fiberglass in those as well. One good thing about not using the cure rust is I won't have to wait 3 hours for it to go off. So there's even more chance that I'll be able to get this bonnet in primer today. Way too much hardener in there, it's going off too quick. Looks like I'll be able to get away with the one skim. That's nice and hard, that's what she said. That is all she's getting in terms of fiberglass. And around this side it's pretty much just left in the pits, which is what I wanted. So now I need to give it a sweep off, give it a degrease, and then I can start going around and dusting in the bare metal bits with some etch primer. There you go, 1 can of etch primer down. I basically ended up just doing every area where I'd broken through to the old primer, because a lot of those patches, they'd have like a little tiny dot of bare metal. Now I need to get myself to the shop to get myself a drink and something to eat. I'm not really sure about the legalities of driving a car without a bonnet, so while it's not raining, I'm going to get Esther back out and take her. Alright, so I'm back and I've grabbed myself a Costa coffee while I was out. Now before I put Esther away, there's something I want to have a look at. I just noticed that we seem to have a bit of an oil leak from the gearbox where the shifter mounts to the box. I'm going to order a new gasket, but for now I want to jack Esther up and just see if she's low on gearbox oil. This RX-8 gearbox is always whined, and when I had a look online at some RX-8 forums, apparently these gearboxes are notorious for whining. They normally start whining after about 40,000 miles. Probably doesn't help that I haven't got, you know, any sort of gator or anything on it, so, you know, any noise that's coming from the gearbox is gonna get into the cabin. So yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with the gearbox, but I just want to make sure that it's not low on oil. I think that's levelish. It's quite hard to tell because this floor isn't level. Just leave the jack under the rear end, but I'll just put these here just in case. There you can see there's a puddle on the floor, all oil hanging off this mount. Cool thing about these Mazda boxes is they actually have a drain plug at the bottom, so if you ever did want to change your oil, it's a lot easier. But the filler one is up there. And much the same with a Type 9, you just fill it up until it comes out of that filler hole. If I remember rightly, it's a 22mm. No, it's not. 24mm. Yeah, it's not running out of there, so it's definitely low. That's alright, it was only a little bit low. That's running out of there now. Sweet. So as it turned out, she only took a dribble, so she wasn't that low at all. Nothing to worry about. I'll just replace that gasket on the shifter and that'd be sweet. Anyway, I'm going to get Esther back on all fours and then crack back on with Maude's bonnet. All right, so this bonnet is pretty much ready to be rolling on some of the primer. I've just noticed this area here where I ground away some rust. There's actually a little dent from the underneath there. I don't know if that was something to do with the alternator fan coming off as well. But yeah, there's a bit of an edge here, so I'm just going to feather that out. That's a little bit better. There is sort of loads of little dimples all over it, you know, especially where I was getting that paint off earlier with a flat wheel, but I'm not going to fuss too much. The Roller-On primer will bury most of those imperfections, and you won't be able to see them because it's going to be painted with matte paint anyway. I'll just give that patch of etch about 10 minutes to go off, and then we'll get the roller out. Give it a really quick tack rag to remove any surface dust. Although this etch primer is quite rough, so it's actually making the tack rag break up. Bit of a disaster. This is exactly what happened when I tried to primer Maude's front panel the first time, where I hadn't left the etch primer long enough to dry, and yeah, basically it's a bit of a reaction. The primer's not sticking properly. I think I'm going to try and thinners that primer off rather than waiting for it to dry and sanding it off. Sweet. All right, so we'll give it a bit of 320. A little bit of panel wipe. And take 2 with the etch primer. So I think it's going to be wise to not bother trying to put anything else on that bonnet today. I don't know what it is with the primer that came with Maude's paint. In the past, etch primer, as long as you let it go off for 20 minutes, you can normally throw anything on top of it. But that primer does seem to struggle. Obviously need it to go off enough so that I can refit the bonnet, because I need to drive Maude home later. So yeah, I just need to keep myself occupied for a little while that etch primer goes off. I'm actually tempted to just put the blue paint straight on top of this next time I spend some time on this bonnet, rather than primering it. It will save a stage to the process, and as I've mentioned before, I'm not going to fuss too much with this bonnet. I would actually like to get a fiberglass one eventually, and I don't actually have a lot of this primer left anyway. I've decided it's about time that I investigated exactly what's going on with my dad's Mark III. As I mentioned in the last video, I suspect that the head gasket has gone. We've got loads of mayo inside the oil cap and on the dipstick, and the last time I drove her, she was getting a bit hot. Now when I do a compression test on a Z-Tech, because the spark plug ports, you know, you have to go through the valve cover to get to them, I like to use this little bit on the compression tester, and it's basically a two-man job. One person has to hold that in the port tightly while the other person turns the engine over. With this car having a CVH though, the spark plug ports are here, which means it's a lot easier to use this screw-in part of the compression tester, and that means that I can do the compression test on my own. So I'm going to whip the air filter off, and then take all the HT leads off, and then remove all the spark plugs, and then I'll do the compression test, and hopefully we'll be able to find out for definite if the head gasket has gone. Just disconnect the coil. Alright, we'll screw this into number 1. Stick the gauge on. About 140 psi, about 155 psi, about 140 psi, and in between 140 and 145 psi. So none of the cylinders are actually dead. Now obviously that doesn't mean that the head gasket hasn't gone. I kind of was hoping that one of the cylinders would be dead just to confirm it, but that's not the case. Now the head gasket might have only gone where the water jacket is and the oil gallery is, so that, you know, it's allowing the water to get into the oil. But this car did have a sort of intermittent misfire issue, so I was hoping that that would have also been caused by a blown head gasket, but I'm pretty sure that would mean that one of the cylinders was actually down, which it obviously isn't. Yeah, I think what I'm going to do now is actually drain the oil out of the car. Definitely traces of coolant on the bell housing down there, and it does look a bit moist where the head meets the block. If you look down the back, there's loads of coolant on the bell housing. And that could indicate that, you know, the head gasket has gone and it's allowing coolant out of the engine. When it overheated, when I checked the coolant, there was still coolant in the bottle. So it wasn't overheating due to a lack of coolant. That morning, actually, I did need to top it up, and I was hoping that, you know, it had a sort of leak from one of the radiator hoses or whatever. But then when it overheated that evening, and then I found that the bottle wasn't empty, and then I found the mayo, that's when I started thinking, you know, head gasket failure. But yeah, let's drain the oil. All right, so definitely some milkiness in the oil. I remember years ago when the head gasket blew on my Pinto engine, yeah, water just gushed out, but that's not the case here. Now, this oil is very old. I didn't get round to changing the oil when I got the Mark III back on the road recently. So yeah, this could be, you know, condensation, as could the mayo on the cap and stuff. And the spark plugs look pretty old, so they could have been causing the misfire issue. So there's nothing sort of conclusive that's saying that the head gasket has gone. Compression test is fine. The oil, although it has got mayo in it, is old, so it doesn't necessarily mean it was the head gasket, but the car did overheat. So if I can figure out why the car was overheating, you know, something not to do with the head gasket, then maybe I won't need to take this cylinder head off. I do kind of feel like I've done this in the wrong order though, because now that it hasn't got oil in it, I can't run it up. And then that means that I can't, you know, figure out exactly where this coolant's coming from that I can see on the bell housing. But I'm guessing that this is the thermostat housing. So maybe the coolant's leaking out of there onto the bell housing, and maybe the overheating problem was actually the thermostat. So I think the next thing I'm going to do is take the thermostat housing off, take the thermostat out, and then I'll take it home with me later and stick it in boiling water and see if it opens, because the overheating problem might be a sticky thermostat. I'm going to hazard a guess that that little thing down there is the bung to drain the coolant. Yep. It looks like, to take that thermostat housing off, there's one bolt at the top there, and then there's two underneath. So that should be quite simple. Shouldn't have said that. Well, that's not a good sign. Should be able to get that stud out easy enough, he says. Gasket kind of looks intact, to be honest. I mean, there is remnants of, you know, coolant coming out here, so that could have been why there's coolant on the bell housing, but seems to be quite a lot of it over there, and, you know, not so much on top of the gearbox here, which would have been directly below that hose. Yeah, I just want to know whether that thermostat works. Yeah, a lot of rust and that around this. Don't want to mess around with it too much because I don't want to free it up if it is seized. I just want to drop it in some hot water and see if it works. So I'll take that home with me tonight. Now, I want to send a massive thanks and a shout out to Patrick Hobman, who got in touch and said that he had a problem with his XR2 back in the day, you know, having mayo in his oil, and it turned out to be the crankcase breather. Apparently on the CVH engine it was a common problem. Once the filter couldn't breathe properly, it made the oil milky. And there it is there. Definitely looks a bit dirty in there. So yeah, massive thanks to you, Patrick, for getting in touch. I really appreciate it.
Alright, so I'm on my way home now. My GoPro kept trying to die while I was putting the bonnet back on Maude due to low battery, even though it had 12% left, which I don't understand. Definitely loads of fails around the garage today, as usual. I know a lot of you appreciate the fact that I leave all my mistakes in. But I think I'm going to summarise the day by only focusing on the positives. First of all, Esther's idle issue is now sorted, which I'm really happy about, and she absolutely rips. Maude's bonnet is now ready for the blue paint, basically because I've decided I'm not going to bother using the primer and I'm just going to slap the blue on it next time I get round to working on it. And my dad's Mk2 Escort might actually not have a failed head gasket. We'll have to see. Now when I get home I'm going to test that thermostat, so I'll chat to you then.
Back at home, and check out the grub that my beautiful girlfriend Kat has made for me today. Pork chops with couscous and cheese stuffed peppers and feta stuffed peppers. Banging. I'm gonna wolf this down and then we'll get the verdict on the thermostat. Well, I am stuffed and I haven't even had my cake yet. It's time to test the Mk3's thermostat. Got the water being heated by the stove and I've got a thermometer here. So far the water's up to 71 degrees. I'm going to put the thermostat in the water. And that thermostat had 88 degrees written on it, so it should open around about 88 degrees. Right, we're at 83.5.6 degrees. It hasn't started opening yet. 85 degrees. 86 degrees. And it's just beginning to open. 87 degrees. And that's 88 degrees. And it is barely open, but it has started opening. Let's see what temperature it gets up to when it's fully open. Oh, I'd say that's probably fully open now. And it's at 94 degrees. The stat is definitely working. Whether it's working as smoothly as it should, I don't know. Right, so the thermostat is obviously working somewhat. I don't know if it's a bit sticky or what, but I don't think I'm ready yet to rule out the Mk3's head gasket. I think what I'm going to do is buy a fresh set of plugs because they looked a bit old. I'm going to put some fresh oil in. I'll just buy some cheap oil and a filter. I'm going to put the car back together with a new thermostat, and I need to get a gasket. I need to get the stud out of the head for the thermostat housing, obviously, but you know, even if I can temporarily just bolt it on with the 2 bolts and use sealer on the gasket, because I want to run the engine and see if I can figure out exactly what's going on before I actually write off the head gasket. I think I'm going to throw some rad flush in the coolant system as well, just in case there's a blockage somewhere and that's causing the overheating. But yeah, seeing as the compression test came back all right, I'm not ready to rip the head off just yet. But stay tuned to the channel to see what I do find out when I do put it back together. If any of you guys have got any suggestions, do put them in the comments. I really appreciate everyone who does give me your advice. Tomorrow I'm going to visit my parents. It's Father's Day tomorrow and my mum's birthday, and I'm hoping to take the Mk1 up to show my dad, but we'll just have to see what the weather's saying. And next week I'm actually going to see a company who's going to be taking care of something on Esther that I've been looking forward to getting done for ages. Now you'll notice that I'm sitting on a garden chair in the front room, and that is because, as well as a new car, Kat has bought a new sofa, and it was supposed to be delivered today, and we've already sold the old one, and now they're saying that the sofa isn't even in the country, so we've got to wait until the end of the month. Anyway, I'll show you Kat's new car in a future video as well. But other than that, I'm going to end this video here. If you did think it was any good, please do give it a thumbs up and a share. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Click subscribe to keep up to date with all my future uploads, and check the links in the description to my social media and my website. I'll also leave my email address down there for anyone who wants to contact me. Massive thanks to everyone for your continued support of my channel. But other than that, until next time, thanks for watching.